Welcome to the Better Podcast, where you and I get better in this game called life. I'm Chin, your co-host today. I co-founded the Smart Investor investment site where we talk about stocks all day.
And I'm your co-host, Ser Jing. I run the Good Investors investment blog and a global equities investment fund together with my friend Jeremy Chia. Now, before we start, here's a disclaimer. Nothing on this show should be taken as investment advice. It is purely for informational and entertainment purposes only. All opinions expressed here by us and our guests are solely our own opinions. We and our guests may hold positions in the financial assets discussed in the show, and these holdings are subject to change at any time.
So we have the Smart Investor, and then there's the Good Investor, and now there's the Better Podcast. So what are we doing here today, Ser Jing?
So in this show, what we are trying to do is to share what we have learned about life, business, investing, and much more.
Great. So I think this is our first episode, right? And we are recording on the 21st of April, 2022. And I believe you have recently read 2 books. That's what I heard.
Yeah. So the first one is Thinking in Systems. And it's a really interesting book. So it's written by Donella Meadows and Diana Wright. And it's really a book about how to think about the world in systems. So the book starts off with defining what a system is. So a system is simply a set of things, people, cells, molecules, or whatever, that are interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern or behavior over time. So I find it to be a really interesting book because I started developing really good insights from the book. So for example, in the book, there is this discussion about how systems thinking can actually allow somebody to model fluctuations in inventory at levels. So you sometimes people think about why is it that inventory levels from a factory can fluctuate so widely, and by applying systems thinking, you're actually able to gain insights as to why that is the case. And the real reason for fluctuating inventory levels is really because there's a delay in informational feedback. So as a producer of a certain product, sometimes you get delays in terms of feedback from the end markets as to where your products are being sold or how your products have been sold. And then that leads to you sometimes over-ordering raw materials or under-ordering raw materials to correct for that supply. And then that information delay that flows into these under or over ordering then leads to these very wide fluctuations in supply. So the mathematical model shown in the book actually give examples of how when you decrease or increase the informational lead times, the fluctuations actually can change as well. So that is quite interesting. So in systems thinking, they talk about this thing called stock, right? I mean, it's not stocks not the variety of stocks that we like, but stock as in just a pool of a certain thing, and it's essentially all the recorded information about a certain object's history. So a stock can be anything. So in a very simple case, if you talk about a bathtub, right, a stock can be the amount of water that goes into it. And in systems thinking, they talk about flows, right? So in the bathtub example, you have the stock, which is the amount of water in the bathtub, and then the flow would be the input of water from the faucet, and the outflow of water from the drainage system that's built into the bathtub. So as you adjust the inflow and if you adjust the outflow, you change the level of the stock, which is the level of water in the bathtub. So in systems thinking, it's all about identifying what are these stocks and what are the inflows and outflows, and how you can change the level of the stock depending on what you want to achieve. Yeah, so it talks a lot about different things. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, triggering a bit of PSDD because I used to be in procurement, and I think for especially for inventory management, when you say there's a delay, I would say absolutely there is. So if you think about if a customer say issues a forecast to its supplier on Wednesday, right? They might not be running that forecast into their system until Monday, right? So there's usually a preset time for the factory itself to actually run the forecast itself. And then it just goes down from there. So that supplier which you're sending the forecast to sends it to their supplier on Tuesday, and it may be run on the following Monday, right? And then it goes down further and further. So the guy on the third or fourth tier could be receiving a forecast which is 4 weeks old, right? And in certain industries, where I was previously in, like the semiconductor industry, a 4-week old forecast is a terrible place to be as because it's probably obsolete and totally wrong, and that causes all sorts of problems in planning.
You mentioned this, and I just can't help but think about this company called Shein. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's spelled Shein. It's a clothing manufacturer based in China, but sells all over the world. And in fact, it does not really sell apparel within China itself. But what's really interesting is that the company has its own IT systems embedded into all the factories that it's working with. So it's not, even though it's a clothing manufacturer, it doesn't manufacture its own clothes. It mostly works with third-party factories, right? But what's really interesting is it embeds its own IT systems into all the factories that it's working with. And so what all these factories have is they get instantaneous information about what is selling on Shein's own e-commerce clothing platform. So Shein sells its clothes online through its websites or apps or whatever. And all of this information, like up to the minute information about what clothes are selling, actually gets transmitted instantaneously to all the factories that it's working with. So it's actually able to, its factories are able to come up with new designs on get new insights about what is selling and what is not selling near instantaneously. So
Do they?
I just
Out of curiosity, do they like manufacture large batches or is it mostly small batches of clothing?
So Shein is a private company, so a lot of information about the company is not available to the public. So what I know is only from articles that I read about the company. But from what I understand, how Shein works is it tends to use information about the product sales that it has to create predictions about what it's going to sell next, right? And so it sends out these predictions to the factories that it's working with, and it tells its factories to produce a small quantity of what the system has predicted, and then it starts being sold, and then the information then gets transmitted back to the factories really quickly, right? So like if the product sells well, then the order gets increased, and I think that's how Shein works. So it's kind of a very quick. They run a very quick kind of feedback loop.
Yeah, because from what I understand, what Zara does, Zara, I think everyone knows what Zara is, right? One of their advantages is that
Hang on, I think the company is called Inditex.
Yeah, Inditex, sorry, but the store itself is called Zara, right? So
That's right.
I think what they do is they don't really come out with their own designs, but they're really fast followers, right? So whatever design which is really popular, what they do is they're able to manufacture it fast by limiting the amount of quantities which they manufacture. So they manufacture really small batches, right? It's going to cost more, but then you are able to deliver it fast. And I think the magic happens when you deliver these small batches. It becomes sort of scarcity, right? Because there's not many of this design, and this causes or allows Zara to actually charge higher prices. So it somewhat becomes a competitive advantage in that sense. So I'm wondering if Shein is sort of like a Zara or Inditex on steroids, where they are actually pumping out like crazy amount of designs. Because I think I saw a sort of chart which shows the different sort of variety of SKUs which the both companies create, and Shein is just off the charts.
No, you're absolutely right. Like how I would classify Shein would be Zara or Inditex on steroids as well. So no, I think what you've said is absolutely correct. Like the amount of SKUs or the amount of experimentation with clothing designs that Shein runs is, I think, orders of magnitude larger than what other traditional so-called fast fashion companies are capable of producing. And I think the magic really lies in the way Shein has embedded its own IT systems into the factories of its partners, and the story behind how Shein has managed to do so is also quite fascinating, and in a way I think a little bit sad about human nature. So in China, factories often tend to be screwed over by their customers. These customers often pay them late or delay payments, and are generally just are not treating these factories nicely at all. And so what Shein did was it went in and said that, hey, you know what? I'm going to treat you, I'm going to respect you, I'm going to pay you on time, I'm going to pay you ahead of time or whatever. Essentially, I'm going to respect you. But in exchange, use my IT systems. And that was it, right? And the factories were all like, oh yeah, sure, it's such a breath of fresh air that like I have this company coming in treating me with respect. Like no one has ever done that. And yeah, so that's how it's managed to embed itself, or how Shein has managed to embed itself into the IT systems of all the factories that it's working with. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think one thing which is probably underrated within being managing supply chains in the past, I think one thing which is really underrated is people start to think that you can just implement programs on with your vendors and so on. It's just uh, you can just do it. But then I think the thing which is underrated is the trust of your supplier on you, right? If to put it in a very simple way, when your supplier receives a call from you, what are they thinking, right? Are they thinking, oh no, this dumb customer again, or is it this guy who's bringing me more business and I want to talk to him, right? And I think that there are a lot of small things, as you mentioned, payment terms. This is one thing which I've always taken care of in my previous life to make sure my suppliers always get paid on time, because I do think that little things like this add up to be advantages, right? The next time your supplier quotes you, if they know that you're going to delay their payment, or you have a track record of delaying their payment, it doesn't matter what your contract term says, you have to trust the customer that they'll pay you on time and you receive your payment on time. Otherwise, whatever delays and so on will soon be reflected in the code now. So there's always some buffer to uh, I think in investing we call it margin of safety, right? Suppliers also apply their own margin of safety against customers which are unreliable. So I think that is maybe a topic which is usually not discussed. Um, I like to go back to the book because I think we went off on a tangent, but like why are you reading this book? And you are investing all the time, you're looking at stocks, you're looking at businesses. What about this book is so fascinating, and how do you think this can be like sort of implemented in part of your process, and maybe even change how you think?
Yeah, so the book, I first learned about the book from a recommendation by David Gardner. So I think for people who know me well, like you included, I'm a big fan of David Gardner, and I like to read the books that he has because I think he has a very unique way of looking at the world, and I think it's just fascinating for me, at least, and interesting to kind of dig into how David thinks about the world. So Thinking Systems was a book that was recommended by him, and so that was the reason why I read it. Um, I think in terms of how it may change or improve or my investment process, I think at this moment, because it's such a new book for me, I am still trying to internalize a lot of the insights that I have. I mean, I took notes on my Kindle or on the book, and I think I made something like 131 notes that run up to like
Okay.
25 PDF pages. So it's something that I'm trying to slowly go through to kind of internalize all the
Mm.
lessons within. But I think one kind of very quick takeaway that I have at the moment is that the economy can also be analyzed using systems thinking, which is that you have like the total productive capacity of a country being a stock, and what are the inflows and outflows that influence this productive capacity, and how changing these inflows and outflows could lead to business cycles, which is something that I think a lot of uh, governments around the world have tried to solve for, mostly unsuccessfully. So I think like just thinking about the economy, or thinking about even the stock market as a system, I think could lead to perhaps interesting thoughts. I'm still trying to wade through all of that. Yeah,
Mm. Any fragile ideas at this moment?
fragile ideas.
Yeah.
No, not
Yeah.
at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And the next book, I think, is something more current, right, to the current scenario which we are seeing.
Oh yeah, current in the sense that it's a book that really heavily involves Russia. So I think as of this moment, unfortunately, the war between Russia and Ukraine is still ongoing. And this book is what is it titled? Let me just pull out my notes. It's titled "Red Notice: A True Story of Corruption, Murder, and One Man's Fight for Justice," and it's written by an investor named Bill Browder. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. And he's the founder of Hermitage Capital, which in the late 90s and mid 2000s was a renowned investment firm that was investing heavily in Russia. So I think at one point in time, Hermitage was the single largest foreign investor in Russia. But today, Bill absolutely hates Russia, hates the political system within Russia. And so he wrote the book partly as a protest against what is going on in Russia. So it's a book that was published in 2015, and it was really inspired by this really tragic true story that happened to Bill. So one of his business associates was actually died in police custody in a Russian prison. So I think the man that died, his name is Sergei Magnitsky. I'm not again pronouncing it correctly, and he died while being in a Russian prison, while he was held in a Russian prison, partly because he was trying to investigate the Russian authorities who had clamped down really hard on Hermitage, and Bill had tasked Sergei to run some investigations for him, and in the process, Sergei was arrested and unfortunately died while he was held in custody by the Russian police. So this is a book about Bill's experience investing and working in Russia. So I'm only about like 40% through, so I've yet to hit the parts where the whole saga with Hermitage and the Russian government happened. But there's already like just this incredible wild stories about Bill's adventures in the countries in the ex-Soviet Union. So he has even early in his life, in his early 20s, he was really active in the countries in the ex-Soviet Union. So like Poland, like Russia, and they're just some like crazy stories. So like I give you an
What's the
example,
craziest
right?
story so far?
The craziest stories of also, well, I do not even know how to rank them, but let me just talk about two, right? So one of them was when before Bill set up Hermitage, he was I think he was both a management consultant and investment banker. So during one of his when he was an investment banker, he went to Russia to advise the management of a Russian company that ran and owned fishing trawlers. So when he went there, he realized that the management needed his help to advise them on a privatization offer. So what happened back then was Russia, I think that was in the late 1990s, so or rather the mid 1990s, and that was during the period when the Soviet Union had already fallen. So Russia kind of transitioned from communism to capitalism or democracy. And what happened was like the Russian government was trying to transfer a lot of its state-owned assets into the private sector. So there was this company that owned the fishing trawlers. So when Bill went down to the company's headquarters in Russia, he realized that the company owned about $1 billion worth of fishing trawlers. So this includes like depreciation. So he kind of worked out like the total amount of money that the company had paid for the trawlers, and he included like a depreciation and so on, and realized that at the current market values back then, the trawlers would be worth about $1 billion US. And amazingly, the Russian government wanted to transfer these assets to the management team of the company, about 51% of all these assets to the management team of the company for, how about you give a guess for the number?
I think I know the number is like really small, like 0.002 book value or something like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the amount that the Russian government wanted was 2.5 million US dollars. So imagine that you are able to purchase like $500 million worth of assets for $2.5 million. So that's one example of like this crazy story. And in Bill's mind, he was like, why do you even have to ask me what you should be doing? You should be buying it. Yeah, right. So and then
so he was there
case,
as a consultant, or like?
I think he was there as an investment banker at that point in time. So I think his career arc was he started off as a management consultant and then a investment banker, and then he went on to
So he's like
set
the
up
third party guy to make sure that everyone's playing fair, or to advise and have his advice be a reference point of whether or not they make the right deal, even though as absurd as it is.
So I think at that point in time, because Russia had been living under communism for so long, there were a lot of people who had no idea what ownership of a company actually meant. So like they had all these accounting numbers on hand, but like they had no idea what to make of it or understand what it truly meant. And so like I guess that's why they needed the help of. So at that point in time, Bill was, I can't remember if it was based in UK or the US, but he's very much like a Western capitalist, right? So I think like they needed help from Western capitalists to kind of understand what was going on. Yeah, so that's my guess.
I see. So I guess like after reading the book, you're not gonna invest in Russia anytime soon, or
Oh,
any
I
Russian
mean,
companies.
right. So like there are just these crazy stories, right? So like this is not a story, but like an anecdote. And so Bill shared this I think Russian what do you call it, like kind of a story that parents would often tell their kids, right? And so I think it gives really good insight into like the Russian mindset at that point in time. I'm not sure if that's the case now, but so he shared this story that there was once a person who was who came across a magic lamp, right, while fishing or something, and he touched the lamp and the genie came out. He was like, I'm gonna grant you one wish. And the man was thinking and thinking, and then genie said, but there's a caveat, and it is that whatever you wish for, your neighbor will get it twice better. So 2 times more of whatever you wish for. And the man who found the genie actually said, oh, if that's the case, make me blind in one eye.
Okay, I thought he's gonna say scare me half to death.
No, I mean, I think scaring me half to death or making me blind in one eye it leads to the same conclusion, right? That like for some reason or another, there's this cultural bias, according to Bill at least, where Russians just cannot stand to have people around them do better than them, or to
I
yeah. I
don't know
mean,
whether this is only a Russian thing though. I mean, like
I have no
keeping
idea.
up with the Joneses, and I think like envy is something which I think humans sometimes feel. So yeah, but
no, I guess you're right. You're right. Yeah, I think it's a very human thing, but yeah, just hearing that tale,
I,
it made me chuckle.
yeah. So I do remember there's this YouTube video on the first McDonald's in Russia, and being American and all, they train the workers to actually smile at everyone who comes in, right? And apparently, some people actually took offense to that because I think smiling is not something which they commonly do, and they actually thought that the workers were making fun of them by smiling at them. So it's I think I'm gonna raise my hand and say that I do not understand the Russian culture enough, but that was quite a amusing scenario, I think, where cultures clash, and it's not just even the simplest thing like smiling, which you think is a common way and universal way to express happiness. I think that it's not just something which is universal across the world. So yeah, much to learn really.
No, yeah,
Any
I
idea?
think you make a great. Yeah.
Any other things which are on your mind lately? Before I share mine.
Any other things that are on my mind lately? So I recently invested in a European payments company called Adyen, which is based in the Netherlands, and I come to realize that the Netherlands has like a collection of incredibly interesting companies. So there's Adyen, which is really profitable. Its free cash flow margins are north of 50%. It's growing really fast. And then yes, there's ASML, which is like the only company in the world that can build this thing called an extreme ultraviolet lithography machine. So it's a very, very important machine in the manufacturing of semiconductors. And if you want to make essentially the leading edge chips, semiconductor chips today, you would need extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, and they can only be found, as in they're only produced by ASML, because it is such a complex piece of technology that essentially every other company in the world gave up along their R&D journey, but ASML stuck to it, and now they have this effective technological monopoly. So that's a company I have a position in, based in Netherlands. And then of course there's another company that I think you and I are really familiar with, Booking Holdings. Right? It's also the
American company, but
price.
it's technically all Netherlands, really.
Exactly. And so you have this, and it's like, I think at one point in time, not sure about now, but at one point in time was like the largest online travel agent, right? And it grew from it was much smaller than its closest competitor, Expedia, like 10 years or so ago, and managed to outgrow Expedia and has much better and has a much better financial characteristics compared to Expedia as well. And yes, it's a company that's again based in Netherlands. So very interesting country. It's not necessarily a very big country both in terms of the population and the economy, but wow, the quality of the companies that are in Netherlands, it
I
fascinates me.
actually recently wrote an article on Bookings Holdings. So I think they started about $1 billion behind Expedia in 2006. And then by 2019, and that's the year before the pandemic, right? They were actually ahead of Expedia by about 3 billion. So this gives them an enormous advantage because it allows them to spend somewhere in the tune of 5 to 6 billion per year on marketing. And that really helps them gain more people faster than their competitors. And the second part of their advantage is really that they are able to convert all this traffic they're bringing in by investing that much, 2 or 3 times better than their competitors. And I think that is an enormous advantage. Second comment I have was on Asml. I think there's a documentary, and I want to say it's CNBC, but maybe I'll drop the link below. But basically, there's this documentary, and it brought up a point which I always thought about when I was in the semiconductor industry. And they during the documentary, they said they were facing some shortages because the machines they were supplying to TSMC were creating chips, which were then used in some of the machines which they need to actually manufacture their components. So there's this sort of systems thinking or loop happening, if you will, where there's a need to actually coordinate what it is, what to prioritize, because I think for companies like TSMC, they would not like to sort of produce chips in small batches, which are usually needed by equipment manufacturers. And if so, but that would damage them if they do not provide enough chips to the smaller players, because these smaller players create machines which are needed then to create the EUV machines, which are then used by them. So there's this sort of constraint and loop which needs to be solved, I think, within the semiconductor industry. If you want to go all cynical, it's almost like machines building machines right now. It's just a matter of time before you go all Terminator. But yeah, let's not go there.
Are you aware that Tesla it's actually building humanoid robots to work in its
Nothing to
factories?
see there, nothing to worry about, guys. So I think recently I had speaking of Adyen, one recent thought I had was I started to notice that when we're talking about financial companies, I've been listening to business breakdowns on Block and Adyen, and there's one common thread which I found between the two of them. And most of the time when we look at sort of digital payment providers, we start thinking that the whole game is about gaining more transactions and GMV and so on. And that don't get me wrong, I think that's an important part of their business, right? But increasingly what I see is they're trying to solve a problem which is very common, or an age-old problem which has been around for a long time, and that is how do you help your customer sell, right? And their customer in this case are merchants, whether big or small. Everyone needs to learn how to sell online and offline, right? And if you sort of stretch this out and sort of connect this to CRM providers, I sort of see this, and again, this is a fragile idea, right? So I do not know whether this is going to exactly happen, but I'm starting to see CRM providers also coming out with payments and trying to provide that payment option for their customers as well. You look at Salesforce, Adobe, HubSpot, also, I did not see an option for Zendesk yet, but maybe they have something in the works. But all these different companies are somewhat, even though they are in different industries right now, CRM and digital payments, they're trying to solve for the same problem, which is to help the customers sell, right? And I think when you look at the backdrop of what's happening in the industry of Facebook and Apple, where Apple is sort of restricting Facebook's access to information, and there's this need to find new ways of actually attracting customers and back to the problem. How do you help a merchant sell, right? I think that this need becomes more urgent, and there could be a convergence between these two industries. How deep it goes, or whether it's going to lead to like mega mergers and so on, PayPal and Salesforce, for example. That's totally speculation on my part, but I think that this is an area which is, I think that there seems to be a trend developing there, and I'm really interested to see where it really goes. I think that um, learning how to sell online is becoming a very challenging problem. Um, if I look at some of the historical context, if you look at Shopify and Atlassian, for example, these two companies were founded or started to gain traction sometime almost a decade ago, right? Shopify almost died, right, during the great financial crisis, and because of the great financial crisis, they were able to actually survive and actually thrive, because as people lost their jobs, they took on entrepreneurship, and Shopify was basically at the right place at the right time for that need. But one thing which struck me between Atlassian and Shopify, and this is partly born out of lack of money, this was a period of time where the transition from offline advertising to online advertising was just starting to happen. So they were able to tap on a lot of cheap advertising at Facebook and Google back then, and really build up this enormous base and become multi-billion-dollar companies that they are today. I think that this benefit, or this sort of uh, uh, I cannot find the word. This sort of need is still there. If you are a startup today, what do you want, right? When you start up, you want to reach as many customers as you can. You want to put your product in front of as many customers as you can, right? It was much easier for Shopify and Atlassian in the past, though they'll probably say it's not. But at least at one vector, when it comes to online advertising, it was much cheaper to advertise on Facebook and Google compared to what it is today. I think today for a startup to actually gain prominence and spread to 100 million customers or a billion customers, it's going to be a lot harder. And I think that there's this real need which is hasn't changed for a long time. Jobs to be done by the late Clay Christensen, or Amazon CEO saying you should build your business based on things which do not change, right? I think that there's this dying need to actually help customers sell, and I think in terms of CRM and digital payments, both of them are heading that way. So it's really interesting for me.
No, thanks for sharing. I completely agree. But one thing that I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts
Mhm.
about is, do you think these CRM companies will build their own payment stack, or will
Mhm.
they kind of just plug, say, the APIs of Stripe or Adyen, and basically plug these APIs into their own software, and have this software be delivered to their clients?
Yeah, I am inclined to think that they're probably going to partner with the payment providers rather than compete with them. It could be in a symbiotic, uh, relationship. That is also why I'm not sure how deep this trend is going to go. Is it going to go real deep and they start merging, or is it just going to be on the surface? That I do not know yet. But there's definitely signs that they are starting to sort of encroach into each other's area, and I think that it will make sense for them to actually partner. If you look at Shopify, for example, their fastest growing segment is actually merchant services, and merchant
Yep,
services is driven by payments, and payments is powered by Stripe, right? So I
that's
do
right.
think that there's this there's likely going to be them partnering with the payment providers. The second part of it is I think that uh, based on Visa's latest, it's not really latest. This was like February 2020, before the pandemic hit and so on. Visa actually shared that their share of digital payments is actually much larger, or 2 to 3 times larger than its share of offline payments, which was fascinating for me. And what this means is, like, if you have like even a buy now pay later provider, a lot of them are actually using debit cards provided by
Yes,
Visa
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
Mastercard. And if I'm not wrong, there was statistics that 80% of the sort of volume actually flows through Visa's network and so on. So there's this very
Yep.
interesting I think interconnectivity happening in the financial world. I think that it's not really going to be about who's gonna win or who's gonna be number one. I think that interconnectivity and how these different partners work together is gonna be key.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And you brought up the point about how like buy now pay later is actually a lot of it is powered by Visa and Mastercard as well. And I find it to be really interesting because there has been a lot of talk also about how Visa or Mastercard could potentially be disrupted. But I think when I actually dug into it, I realized that the competitive positioning of Visa and Mastercard is actually a lot stronger than what you might think on the surface. Because like a lot of these newfangled fintech kind of companies or products, a lot of it is actually built upon the rails that Visa and Mastercard have already built, and they are really good rails. So like it seems as though like partnership is a much more attractive proposition for a lot of fintech companies rather than really just trying to pull out those rails and install their own. So yeah, I think that was an interesting observation that I had learned about like over the last few months.
So is there anything else we have to cover?
Anything else? No, in fact I think like this could be a kind of a good place to end today's podcast.
Yep. So see you guys around. Let us know what you think. Throw some stars and let us know what we should talk about. See ya.
Bye.